Happy New Year, everyone. It is 2026, fresh start, new beginnings, all that good stuff. So we're gonna build a computer to get the year kicked off on the right note, even though building a computer might be a little bit tougher in 2026. But we're gonna wait and see on that. We're gonna try to start on a more positive note. We have a really high-end build today. I can't say it's gonna be the fastest computer you can possibly build. There are a few things we're gonna be waiting and seeing as we do the build process. So it's gonna be lots of fun. It's a portable build in the Mechanic Master C28 case, which has a handle on top, because we're gonna be taking this system to CES.
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by the Paul's Hardware store on paulshardware.net, the only official source for Paul's Hardware merchandise. Tantalizing t-shirts, brilliant beer sets, high-quality hoodies, and more, all featuring the classic thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers, or the 8-bit thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers who hate curves. New designs are added sporadically and at random, so head over to paulshardware.net and get some of that sweet, sweet merch right now. Or not right now, after you watch the video. Either way.
So apart from the case, which we're going to be taking a closer look at in just a moment, we have a lovely assortment of parts, and you might notice we have too many parts. For example, we have two white Lian Li power supplies, an 850 watt SFX unit, and a 1000 watt ATX unit. This case does support ATX and SFX power supplies, but I'm still not sure if that 1000 watt unit is going to fit, which is also why we have two graphics cards, the RTX 5080 and RTX 5090 from NVIDIA, the Founders Editions, because they're smaller and they fit pretty nicely in SFF cases. Although to be fair, this is a micro ATX case, so if we can fit the larger 1000 watt power supply, we'll go with the 5090, which I think is that one. And if not, we'll do the backup 850 watt and we'll go with an RTX 5080. Nice to have options. This isn't necessarily the fastest gaming PC that you can possibly build right now or anything, but it is fairly close to it. We're going with a 9950X CPU. We would go with the 9950X 3D if our focus was gaming, but the focus is actually a little bit more towards video editing with this system. Not sure if Joe's going to be taking any time to game on this system, but he is going to be doing a fair amount of editing at CES. So to that end, we have a triple SSD configuration. We've got a Lexar NM790, which is a PCIe Gen 4 drive. We've got a Lexar 1090 Pro, which is a very fast Gen 5 drive. And then mostly to justify my motherboard choice, we have an additional Kioxia XG8 2TB drive. So we can have an operating system drive, a raw video drive, and a cache drive. I don't know if I mentioned yet that this is a pretty much all white build, but if you're looking for a micro ATX white AM5 motherboard, your options are kind of limited. There's only 5 or so. I went with the ROG Strix X850-G gaming Wi-Fi because it's actually fairly reasonably priced. I think it was about $230. And Asus wedged not 2, not 3, but 4 M.2 SSD slots onto this motherboard. Of course, several of them are going to be passing through the chipset, so they're not all getting maximum bandwidth or anything like that. But it does give us the connectivity for the most storage possible in a micro ATX build. I got some supplemental white CT120 fans from Thermaltake there. We got the standard and reverse airflow versions. Since we have a higher core count 16-core 9950X processor, I went with an all-in-one liquid cooler. This case supports up to 280mm AIOs. So we're going with a very reliable and trusted Arctic Liquid Freezer 3, and this happens to be the ARGB version. Not that we needed more RGB in this build, but it is a 280mm cooler. So that's going to kind of maximize our cooling potential as we'll be doing lots of rendering and whatnot with this system. Finally, the piece of resistance. No, I did not buy this memory recently. I went down to the memory vault, as you guys may have seen, and I discovered that yes, I do have a white Trident Z5 RGB memory kit. Only downside here is that it's not the Expo version. It's got Intel XMP and not AMD Expo for this type. But look at that, a 64 gig memory kit. This is probably worth thousands of dollars at this point. I'm not sure what's happened to the memory market at the beginning of 2026. It just kicked off. But more memory is better for a workstation, especially a video editing type PC. And I gave away my 2x48 gig kits. So 64 gigs is what Joe's gonna have to work with. Very disappointing. Fabulous, those are the parts we're working with. Screwdriver in hand, let's get started. All right, we've already made a good amount of progress with our build, just getting the motherboard set up, CPU installed, we got the mounting plates for our all-in-one liquid cooler on there, installed the memory, of course, very delicately. We don't want to make sure anything goes wrong with that. The motherboard does have 4 M.2 slots. One of them is actually mounted on the back, as is pretty popular with mini ITX motherboards that need a little bit of extra storage. I opted not to use that one simply because the lowest M.2 and the one on the back are the ones that go through the chipset. Middle M.2 is the PCIe Gen 5 capable one, so that's where our Gen 5 drive went. And then our 4TB Gen 4 drive went in the top slot. Now normally, if I was setting up a new computer, I would want to just install the SSD that the operating system is going onto, then get Windows installed and then add the extra drives. However, this system with the M.2s being right there is going to be a little bit harder to get to. And one of the reasons I chose that Kioxia drive is it already has a Windows installation on it. So we're at least going to be able to use that to get the system up and running, and then we might do a clean install afterwards. But now at last we can get our case out of its box, and it looks like the shipper already kind of did a little bit of that for us. Fortunately, it doesn't look like that punched all the way through. And we can verify that, yes, it is the white version of the case in there. Okay, we have been doing a partial disassembly and looking over the Mechanic Master C28 case. Cool little case. We will definitely be attaching the handle to the top for more easy transportation, but we've come across our first problem. And this is totally my fault. I went with a 280mm radiator because a bigger radiator better, right? However, when perusing the manual, and it does come with the Chinese manual and an English manual, which is cool, we discovered for 280mm radiator support, you actually need these optional accessories. You need a ventilated side panel because the tempered glass panel does not let airflow through. So if you want to do a 280, you actually have to install it on the side right there. You need to replace the tempered glass side panel. That vented side panel is sold separately, as is the 280mm mounting bracket, and we do not have those. On the plus side, the remaining accessories are pretty well thought out. We got a little case with our zip ties and screws and whatnot. They include a little Mechanic Master screwdriver, so that's nice too. And we've got some extra mesh and the adapter bracket for ATX to SFX power supplies. I also do not have any 240mm AIOs, white or black or any color actually, on hand. I have plenty of 360s, but no 240s. And since we really want to get this system set up so Joe can take it home to start getting it set up for editing and getting all his software installed, we're going to toss the color scheme out the window and go with an air cooler, since I do have this quite capable Noctua NHU12S Chromax Black. So it's not an all-white build. It's a black and white build, you know? We're just mixing it up a little bit. And to be fair, even if we did have that bracket, this is listing it as an ITX build solution with water cooling. So I'm not even sure if we could do this setup with the micro ATX motherboard that we have. What we do have though is 162mm of height clearance and a 158mm tall heatsink on this air cooler. So fingers crossed, it should fit. I just gotta remove the brackets that I already installed for the AIO. All right, so plan B is installed. I even located another Chromax fan that matches so we can have a push-pull, which basically makes it just as good as an AIO. That's what I'm gonna claim. So the next phase of the build is all about the case and can we fit what we want to fit in the case. Ideally, we're going to fit this power supply, but honestly, I'm hesitant and I'm not totally sure it's gonna work. So the case comes pre-installed with an ATX mounting bracket at the top, but there are multiple other ways that you can mount power supplies in this case, depending on whether you're using a micro ATX motherboard or a mini ATX motherboard. And for those other mounts, you use this bracket adapter to get the ATX size down to SFX. Now this Lian Li power supply, the Edge 1000, is pretty cool because it's got this little extra modular thing that sticks off to the side for plugging in your modular cables. Worked pretty well. We use this in the HTPC build. It also has a USB hub and a fan hub that you can connect right here with magnets, or you can plug in a cable and put that elsewhere in the case. I don't think we're gonna need that. But if you're front mounting a power supply, you probably want the fan, which is an intake, to point towards the front of the case. But if we did that, then we're gonna have a very large piece blocking where we would probably need a bit of space for our graphics card and that sort of thing. So I am okay to attempt the 1000 watt option and to attempt installing it thusly, in which case we're gonna add some more fans so we have plenty of airflow going through the case since the power supply will be sucking in some warm air. But as with several things in this build, there's a lot of like, will it work? And a lot of like actual verifying. So let's verify by disassembling this case a little bit further. So as the motherboard manual has advised, we've gone ahead and installed the motherboard, and this case has sort of an internal frame and then a bunch of panels. All the exterior panels can pretty much be removed. So there's lots of screws, but it also means the case is very like disassemblyable, because everything's held on with screws. There's really not many rivets to be spoken of. And I appreciate that. Even removing the bottom panel here actually removes a couple of the feet. So that's why when it's sitting down right now, it's a bit of a jaunty angle. Practically speaking though, we can now see if things are gonna fit now that the motherboard is installed. So what we wanna do is 2 exhaust fans at the top, 1 exhaust fan at the back, 2 intake fans at the bottom down here, and then our power supply mounted up here. And looking at how everything's laid out, I think we might actually have room. Small form factor builds can really be a pain in the butt trying to figure out where everything goes and routing cables and trying to keep things tidy and everything, but also very satisfying to have a lot of hardware, a lot of powerful hardware in a relatively small package. I have installed all 5 of our fans. Yes, we have 2 black ones at the bottom, but those are obviously chosen from the get-go to match with our Noctua NH-U12S cooler, which we also were planning to use from the get-go. Now, because there's 0 space behind the motherboard tray in this case, if you're gonna try to do any cable management, you really need to plan ahead. There is sort of a little channel that's just behind these fans where I was able to route a lot of the cabling. Right now, that's all just coming down over here loose. Having a fully modular power supply is also gonna be very clutch if you're building in this case, because routing those cables ahead of time before the power supply is installed was also super helpful. Joe didn't want to plug in any of the RGB LEDs in this build because he was like, I don't care, Paul, we don't need them for editing. And I was like, I agree, Joe, but what about the fans? The fans want the RGB LEDs. And Joe was like, I don't care about that. But I was like, no, Joe, we're gonna do it no matter what.
It slows down the editing process.
Slows down the editing process. Yeah. So I do have RGB LEDs plugged in for all 5 of these fans, as well as the fan power itself. And then I was looking at this space up here and I was like, no, there's no way the ATX power supply is still gonna fit there. I'm gonna have to remove a fan or something like that. But look at this, here's our ATX bracket and it fits. It fits right there, look at that. All right, so we're gonna mount this to the power supply, see if that'll fit down in there. We gotta plug in our 24 pins still, and then we gotta make sure our graphics card fits. And then we put on all the exterior panels, hopefully. Hopefully that's what's gonna happen next. You guys let me know. Okay. And this needs to go right here, and this needs to plug into it. Ah. Okay. The motherboard clearance is very minimal. All right, just give it a little jostle. All right, so what's actually blocking it right now are these cables right here. So this is so barely fitting. There it is. That's where it's supposed to be. That's amazing. Look at that. All right. Joe pointed out a very good thing. We're gonna make sure we have the power supply switched on before we seat it all the way, because that's important. Oh, look at that. Okay, so the very bottom corner of the power supply is conflicting with the PCB for the front panel I/O right there. So I'm gonna just push it. I'm gonna push it. I'm gonna force it. What could go wrong? The power supply needs to shift up like 1 millimeter. So we're gonna use some force to get it.
Damn, look at those arms.
Around.
So the muscles.
Shut up. This is a workout. This takes some effort. Around the corner. Why can't it slip by there? No. So that lets me get the PCB out of the way so I can fit this up to the top. I just need to get this to line up with these holes. Oh, okay, which it is lining up with now. That's cool. Do this. How did I get past this bundle of cables when I unscrewed this? I have no idea.
Can you screw it from the back?
I don't think so.
I think you possibly could.
All right, Joe. We'll try your idea. Let's go, a little bit at a time. What a great idea, Joe.
I'm like the stress reducer, that's the thing.
Going from this side.
Brilliant. There we go. If anyone was wondering if you can fit the Liam Lee Edge 1000 watt power supply in this case, yes you can. This clearance is there. I mean, there's zero clearance, but yeah, that's why we had to remove this PCB in order to fit it in, but now it fits. My goodness. Of course, this power supply is an ATX power supply, so all the cables are made for full-size ATX cases, which means we have excess cable in some places, so just tucking some of it in up there. Okay. There's a very decent chance this is not going to fit, because... Alright, so our 5090 is a pretty lengthy graphics card. The 5080 is a little bit shorter, so we do still have a backup option. I'm not optimistic here. Ah, so close. So yeah, I can tell right now. We can install the 5090, or we can install the motherboard power connectors, but I don't think we can install both. Shucks. Well, there's a look, guys. We did our best to try to go like all out with the 5090, but unless we were going with one of the, there's not very many smaller versions of the 5090 either than the Founders Edition. I think we're gonna need to do one last change here to our plans, although we did sort of call this at the beginning and go with the 5080 instead. So close. I thought the 5080 was shorter. Is the 5080 not shorter than the 5090? That's not as tall. Well, clearly that's still gonna block the power connectors. We work so hard. We try so hard. All right, this is the part of the build where we focus on the positive, like the fact that this motherboard has one of these push button releases to hopefully allow us to remove this card more easily. 304 millimeters is the length of the Founders Edition RTX 5090. And somehow I got into my head that the 5080 was actually shorter. It is not. Therefore, neither of those cards will fit. I actually have another 5080, the Asus Prime, that's actually a couple millimeters longer than this one, so that one would not work either. So, practically speaking, if anyone is watching this build thinking like they want to build in this case or do a similar build, there are other choices. And in fact, the choice that we started off showing you guys is this power supply, and I could swap this power supply in and we could go with the 5080. Or if someone wanted to build the maxed out build, in this case, an SFX 1000 watt power supply would be the way to go, because those do exist. I just don't have one right now, at least especially not one that is white and is gonna match. But the reason I'm not swapping this guy in is because, as you might have figured out, this build was pretty meticulous and was sort of done in a specific order to make sure the cables could be routed the way they need to go. If I wanted to swap the power supply right now, I would basically have to disassemble this entire system in order to mostly get these CPU power cables out. I would have to take these fans out, the power supply, of course. I'd have to undo a lot of stuff. So acknowledging that we flew very close to the sun and we came very close to this just all fitting in perfectly, and it would have been so satisfying, we're actually just going to be dropping in an RTX 5070, which for the purposes of video editing should be just fine. It's got 12 gigs of VRAM. Joe said that's no big deal. The system memory is actually a much bigger factor in terms of the editing prowess of the build. And this card is more like 250-ish millimeters long, so as you can see right here, aha, that fits. And there's way more clearance there, so we can plug our motherboard power cables back in. Got the outer panels all replaced, mounted the handle on top that just needs a couple longer screws on either side, and then it mounts to the same places that top panel mounts to. And before we put the side panels back on, we gotta do a little test boot on these.
Yep.
This one?
Yeah.
That one? Did I break the power button?
Power switch is off.
Power switch. Did I flip the power switch the wrong way? Boo. All right, I guess I need to take a panel off. And that's why you do the power test before you reinstall a bunch of panels. The power switch is on. Think of all the times to not do an outside the box test build or anything. Yeah, well, the unfortunate thing when something like this happens, especially with a build like this where everything's kind of packed in really close, is you kind of have to start taking things apart. It's kind of a pain in the butt. Okay, the build is complete. This one was a bit of a roller coaster ride, and at certain points I was like, oh no, is this sort of a precursor or a foreshadowing of 2026? But then later on I was like, aha, this is a precursor or a foreshadowing of 2026, because when things don't work out perfectly, but through some perseverance, a little bit of troubleshooting and common sense, and of course stepping back to take a deep breath and not let yourself go completely crazy, we can overcome even the most disappointing setbacks. Now I must of course point out that most of the setbacks and problems with this build were my fault. I was using a bit of a hodgepodge of hardware that I already had on hand and made a few assumptions about the case that turned out to be wrong. But there was a very exciting time when it seemed like everything was just gonna barely fit, and then it all fell apart to the point where suddenly the system wasn't even booting at all. And that's a really frustrating thing to happen when you get a new PC build all put together, because getting no response from the power button after everything is theoretically connected and plugged in properly could be the result of such a wide range of potential problems that I really felt I had no choice but to disassemble the whole system and start from scratch. And the plan at that point, of course, was to reset everything as an outside of the box build with minimal hardware connected, because that's usually the beginning of the troubleshooting process. Fortunately, although it was somewhat embarrassing, the problem turned out to be just that the power plug on the power supply, the extension from the back here that leads up to the PSU, was just not plugged in all the way. It was partially plugged in, so I was actually getting a little bit of noise when I would push the power button, which made me think that there was some sort of a short somewhere in the build. But after seating that all the way, the system did power on, and that was at least a bit of a relief because it indicated that the hardware is still functional. I didn't have like a faulty motherboard or anything more fundamental that was causing problems like that. But because the system did power on, I had some renewed confidence and I decided, you know what? I'm gonna go with the 5080 in this build because I have the power supply to support it. And of course, swapping from the ATX to the SFX unit gave me enough room to get the 5080 plugged in, get everything rewired up. The cable management, I think, turned out not too bad, given that this case really doesn't have a whole lot of areas to tuck away and hide cables. And I even got a white or sort of whitish light blue color scheme going with the LEDs right now, since it is winter and it seemed appropriate. So after all that, I'm actually super happy with how this build came together. The case was very interesting to work with. I like the modularity of it and the fact that they have screws everywhere so you can remove panels where needed. It is a little bit quirky since it does have the flexibility of like the ITX or the micro ATX build, ATX or SFX power supply, and a decent amount of space here for graphics cards, although of course that is pretty severely limited if you go with a larger PSU. Oh, and did I mention that since I swapped in the SFX power supply, we went with the RTX 5080 rather than dropping down to the RTX 5070. With that though, this build is finished. I'll post links to the parts I used down in the description below. I'm gonna hand it off to Joe so he can get it all set up and ready to go for CES. Speaking of which, that will be the next content going up on my channel, so subscribe if you're not already. We have a CES kickoff video that we'll be starting off with, and then lots of content coming at you next week for the duration of the show. But that is gonna wrap it up for this video. Definitely hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed it. Happy New Year, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.